Hello all, thank you so much for joining. This is Mike from Dynamic Point. We also have Richard on the phone as well, also from Dynamic Point. We're going to give it a couple minutes here just to get started. Again, thank you for taking the time out of your day. Today's session will run about 30 minutes, so we'll get started here in a brief second. Thank you again. Again, thank you for those who have just joined. We're going to get started here in about 1 or 2 more minutes, giving a little bit more time for more people to join. Appreciate all of you coming. All right, according to my watch, it's showing a minute and a half past the hour, so we could go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Mike. We also have Richard from Dynamic Point on the phone. I'll be leading the webinar today, and Richard will be monitoring the chat for any of your questions, as well as running any color commentary during the presentation. So if you do, on that note, if you do have any questions, I know everyone's muted. We're probably not gonna have an open mic at the end because it is only 30 minutes. But if you do have any questions, feel free to enter them in the chat or in the question pane, and we'll be sure to try to adjust those as I pause. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Today, Office 365 for AP invoice automation. The whole theme here is using what you own to automate AP processes. For the sake of full disclosure, we will be covering one of our applications, which is our AP automation product. But a lot of what I'll be showing you today is just using Office 365 functionality. So there is a product being featured, of course, but a lot of it you could do if you have our product or not. And I'll highlight that as we go through it. So we'll go ahead and get started. We'll have a brief introduction of who we are, and then we're going to get right to a demo here. So Dynamic Point creates apps on top of Office 365. So that is our home for all of our products. We use what Microsoft calls the Power Platform, which is a whole environment for creating products like ours, leveraging the various tools that come with the Office 365 environment to basically deliver applications to our customers that are lower cost because we're not building them from scratch, but also more functional because they're leveraging this gigantic platform that is being provided by Microsoft. So the analogy I like to draw there is it's very similar to sort of adding an app to your mobile phone. I'm sure we've all done that. When we add an app to our mobile phone, it asks us these questions: can I use your location, and send you text notifications? That is, of course, the app using the platform that is being provided by the iPhone or Android, whatever your flavor. And we are going to do that same thing, but within an Office 365 environment. We have a history that actually predates Office 365. So we used to create custom apps as well as do on-prem back in the day. And then within the past 6 or 7 years, given the growth and the feature set provided by Office 365, we have entirely moved all of our products to that platform. So that is enough about us. Let's go ahead and keep it going here. So we do offer 3 products that are, again, all built on that framework. The one that we'll be focusing on today is this guy right here, which is our invoice automation. So the invoice automation app is really taking invoices from vendors, being submitted from vendors, and applying AP automation to them. So that includes automation of the receipt, workflow associated to it, using OCR or optical character recognition to recognize and extrapolate data from the invoice, And then generally what we just call AP management, that gets into the account assignments and companies and more of the financial aspect. And ultimately this will be integrated as an invoice in our ERP application for the sake of posting and payment. As you can see, we also have a portal application as well as an employee expense, and we're going to skip those for today just because we are running on a tight time frame and we only have 20 minutes here, so we're going to keep it going. All right, so what does it mean to be built on Office 365, right? For us, that means leveraging this Microsoft ecosystem and what they call the Power Platform. And the Power Platform is several different applications that are generally included with everyone's subscription that you can leverage within your products. So the way ours works, specifically focusing on invoice automation, is we add an app, this guy over here, to SharePoint. So SharePoint becomes the home for the product. It's where all the data is stored. It's where the invoices are going to be coming in. We're going to leverage this repository, this content management system that SharePoint is going to provide us. For workflow, Microsoft provides us another tool by the name of Power Automate. Power Automate is Microsoft's Swiss Army knife. It is extremely configurable. We'll be highlighting some of its features today on things we could do, but it is fairly endless on the capability of that product. For capturing invoices, I could use different tools. I could use Power Apps if I want to enable people to submit them mobilely. I could use forms for the concept of like a check request, and I'll showcase some of those today, but those give me the ability to create applications within this overall process that maybe I want to offer to outside people like managers or even people in the field who may be submitting invoices from their car or truck, et cetera, while they're on the road. And then the last but not least, you're going to see Power BI there. Power BI, of course, is Office 365's analytic tool. Given all the data is sitting here in SharePoint, we could begin developing reports, KPIs, and dashboards using the Power BI framework. Okay, enough of that. We're going to talk about invoice automation, and then we're going to start showing you features. So the first step, we generally like to simplify it for the sake of wrapping our heads around it, but invoice automation we generally say is 3 steps, right? Step 1 is this one right over here, and that is getting the invoice from the vendor. And ultimately, you can see here, it's all going to go into this library. So we're using a SharePoint library as the collection device, right? That's where it's going to come into, or it's where we're going to begin storing these, as well as developing a repository and do things later down the road, such as OCR. So now how do I get an invoice into that library? Maybe I want my vendors to email it to me, right? So they want to send me this to a shared inbox, and then I want to process that invoice as they come in. Maybe I want to give my employees a check request, right? So this is more applicable to a distributed buying environment. I have various managers procuring goods and services. They get the invoice and they want to submit it to AP. Mobile upload, again, that's more applicable for maybe a contractor type environment where you have people in the field wanting to take pictures of invoices and submit them. Portal, maybe I want to have my vendors submit them directly and I could offer them a portal to do so. So the next step in the process is the processing of it. I get the invoices, what am I going to do with them? I want to recognize key information you see in OCR. Here's where our app is going to come into play. This is going to be doing such things as the financial aspect, whether it's PO matching or account assignment. And then this is also where we're going to tie into the Power Automate workflow. Maybe I need to route these for approval. Maybe I need to compare them to PO amounts and do some threshold processing, things like that. And then the last but not least step is the accounting integration. After this is all done, this is why we're doing this, is to automatically bring this transaction into an accounting or ERP application, creating the appropriate transaction, whether it be a PO match or just a miscellaneous AP invoice because there is no PO to match it to. So let's go focus on that first step. So keep this in mind. We're going to look at this invoice receipt, and we're going to show you all kinds of capabilities here. All right, so here I have my AP processing dashboard. Really, it's nothing more than a SharePoint site. I have added our app to this site, but really there's nothing that separates this site from any other in the world. The way I've laid it out is basically following those 3 steps. So here's the invoices coming into the library, here's the ones that are being processed, and this is just a link to my ERP to see those that have already integrated. I also have some examples of some dashboard reports here, some KPIs using Power BI showing such things as unapproved invoice by vendor total and then an aging. But what we want to do is come into this library. So what you're going to see here is not at all exciting. It's a blank library, right? And that's not that cool in itself, but what I have associated to this library is what we're going to see. So we're going to start off first with this concept that I want my vendors to email me invoices. And maybe this is going on today for you. So vendors are sending in invoices to you, and then of course they're going to someone's inbox for processing, someone in accounts payable. Let's say we want to take that process and add a little bit more structure to it such that there's visibility. It's not just all buried in Outlook, and we want to capture invoices and save them in this library. So what I'm going to do is create an email here, and I'm going to send it to our AP automation inbox. And with that, I'm going to submit a consulting invoice. I'm going to do AP automation. I'm going to submit a couple times just to have it there. And we're going to go ahead and attach an invoice. And I'm pretending to be a vendor here. So voila, there's my invoice. And we're going to go ahead and submit it. Now, what is going on in the background is this invoice is going to be routed to this email, of course, using Outlook, and then it's going to be saved. Ta-da! Okay, so we captured the invoice, right? So you guys all see this invoice, and what's going to happen next? I have to talk pretty fast here because after this invoice is captured, we submit it to OCR. So by submitting it to OCR, we're going to extrapolate key data from this invoice. So what you're going to see here is all these columns will populate with the values that were obtained from the OCR process. Again, no one is doing this, by the way, for the sake of their own sanity, but I'd like to show you how this works, right? Because this is intended to be educational. Ta-da, okay, so there you go, right? Invoice came in and I was immediately able to extrapolate some key data from it. So what happened, right? Because we're gonna focus on this a little bit because I'm gonna show you different ways that I could capture this invoice. And this, by the way, none of this is using our product. This is just Office 365 features, which in itself, we have seen organizations use this as an improvement over their existing process without going for full automation, because now they have their invoices in the system, they could add like a status field, and then they could just take it from here. So let's talk about what happened really quick. So what happened is basically we brought it in from Outlook, right? So we brought it in from Outlook, Power Automate picked that up and then added it to SharePoint. And what I will do is open up a link. So this is not rocket science, it's well documented. And you could see there's a lot of blogs out there that tell you how to exactly do this, right? So this is using Power Automate. When a new email arrives, it's gonna create that file in SharePoint and then populate all of the attributes. So I'm gonna go ahead and include this in the chat so everyone has it if they would care to reference it at some point in their future. But it's simple to do, right? So I captured that invoice and now it's in that library. So let's keep that thought in mind and let's look at different methods that I could use this. So let's go with the concept that my invoices are being received in the field. And what I mean by that is managers are procuring items and then they want to submit those to accounts payable. And I don't want them just emailing these invoices to me because that's not very structured. I want to collect data from these managers as they're submitting these invoices that I don't want to have to go haggle with them for or reply to their email or whatever. So what I've created here is a simple form. This is using Microsoft Forms, right? It's no secret. It's right down here, powered by Forms. But what I'm doing is I've created a form for the information that I want to capture while my internal resources submit invoices to accounts payable. So they're going to fill this out. You can see here, I have information that I'm trying to capture, right? Requested cost center probably means something to me. It means something from a financial aspect. Maybe it's gonna help me assign the chart of accounts to this, but it's gonna help me further down the road for either assigning accounting or determining maybe the workflow, like the approver associated with this cost center. We're gonna hit next. We're gonna put in some key data here. And then of course, they're gonna upload the invoice. And we will take the Fabricam invoice and we're gonna submit it. And what is behind this form is, again, a Power Automate workflow that is going to take this form, take the key values from it, and again, drop it in that same library. And if you notice, oh, there it is, right? So now I captured all those fields as well as the invoice, and it is captured in that library. So you may notice that these are disappearing on me, and I'll get to that later. We are picking these up and processing them as soon as they come in, but we're gonna disregard that for now and just focus on the submission. So I'm gonna go back to my PowerPoint slide really quick because I have another article to share. And that used a form, right? So as opposed to coming in via Outlook, I gave my internal resources a check request form. They filled it out. In that, using that form, I'm able to capture some key details, cost center, what's the justification, maybe the PO number, things like that. Again, it used Power Automate and it brought it in the SharePoint. So let's go ahead and click on this forms. And with this, you're gonna see a video, of which of course I will not play you now, but it is the same thing that I just went through. And it is a great resource, and it shows you exactly how to do that, how to tie forms into a library, extrapolate the results, and then save them to SharePoint. All right, let's keep going with more examples. So let's talk about the idea if I was using my phone, right? I have mobile resources and they want to submit invoices to me. Well, Microsoft, of course, gives us more tools to do that too. So let's bring my phone over and I'm going to open up this simple OneDrive application. And OneDrive, whether or not you know it or not, OneDrive is really built on top of the SharePoint platform. So in addition to saving to OneDrive files and things like that, I could also save directly to libraries. So if I go into my EasyAP product right here, and I go to invoice upload, here I have all my invoices that I've previously submitted, but I could go ahead and take a picture. Here I have an invoice on my desk. Bam, snapshot that guy. Confirm it. Oops, that didn't work well. I sort of cut it too aggressively. Let's try that again. Scroll up, get the whole invoice. There we go. Okay, so now I'll confirm it and it'll go directly into this library, right? So yet another method that I could capture that invoice, but in this case, in a very easy mobile fashion. So again, a vendor doesn't have to quote unquote email it. I don't have to have a check request form. I could just have employees go ahead and submit that from their phone. If I were to do that same thing, but maybe make it a little bit fancier, right? I could also save to this library using Power Apps. So if you're familiar with Power Apps, I could create mini applications, no code, right? And just go ahead and configure forms. But I happen to have an invoice app here. As you can see by the title of this one, we actually created it for a farm that wanted to capture details about the invoices that were being submitted such that they could later code them. And let's just say I'm out buying, I don't know, fertilizer for the farm to receive from me. And by assigning these drop downs here, so this is a pretty basic Power App, they're actually coding the invoice for me, whether or not they know that or not. And then again, I could take a picture of it and save it. So all of this is just enabled by SharePoint libraries, right? Because all of these tools that I'm showing you work with SharePoint libraries. Is there more? Absolutely. If I go open up Teams, I have an invoice automation site here. If I wanted to upload those invoices from Teams, I could do that as well, right? So I have a shortcut saved for invoice upload. Maybe I want to drag and drop it, save right here. Can I scan it? Of course you can, because you could scan to a library as well. Okay, keep it moving. So we are, let me close out of a few things here so I don't lose myself. Okay, so what happened is I received that invoice. Again, not only did it save it to the library and I captured some key information, but it also got submitted to an OCR process. So let's talk about that briefly as well. We already talked about that slide, so let's go to the next one. So OCR integration with libraries. So what happened here is when that file received to that library, I called an OCR process and it populated all of those columns that I've configured with data from the invoice. And there is a lot of different ways to do that. Power Automate is providing the backbone to it, but you could use different OCR tools, including Microsoft AI. So here's an article that I'll send you guys showing how to use invoicing processing pre-built model. So this is using Power Automate. It's a really simple flow, as you could see. They extract information from the invoice, submitting the file to Microsoft AI, and then they get the data, and then they add it to an Excel table. Of course, you'd probably want to replace this with a SharePoint list or library. So again, great information using this framework that you already own. So in an effort of keeping it moving here, as I mentioned, these guys are all mysteriously disappearing, right? And for us, they're now being pulled into our application. And what our application does, by the name of Easy AP 365, is it takes these invoices and does the financial elements of it. And what I mean by that is it matches it to POs. It assigns templates, brings in such things as, cost centers and accounts and locations, captures the invoice, of course, does duplicate checks. If you look at my little warning message here, is in fact saying it's a duplicate. So we leverage the Office 365 to get the data, to store it, use it as a repository, but then we're sort of adding another little element here of the financial aspects associated to it, right? I zoomed in pretty far. So we could see the invoices and then begin assigning them to accounts and things. Or we could submit this for workflow. The workflow that we've tied in here is, again, using that Power Automate framework to route this invoice for review and approval. So I'm not going to make any changes to this one. I'm just going to go ahead and submit it. And what it's going to do is call this pre-configured workflow I have that looks at various attributes of the invoice. In my case, it is using the cost center assignment to determine the approver. That person will then get tasks that get assigned to them for reviewing and approving these invoices. So I'm going to go ahead and now pretend to be an approver, and I'm going to open up my email. And what we should have waiting for me by the time my email opens here is my invoice ready to review and approve. So here you can see I have my consulting invoice. And as our friend, oh, there she is. My friend Outlook will open this. It should bring it into view here. But what we will have is the invoice attached to this task, right? So I could go ahead and click on this and review it. Come on, Outlook. All right, here we go. So I could click on this and review it. So here's my invoice, here's all the details of it. Here's some information that was extrapolated. So in other words, I grabbed some of that key information from that library and I could actually approve or reject this invoice. So again, it used that workflow, routed it for approval, and now it is pending a managerial review. Sometimes we need a little bit more, right? Sometimes managers actually, or reviewers, I should say, actually edit the invoice. So if I click on that link, it'll actually bring me to an edit screen that gives me the ability to maybe perform some operations such as vendor assignment or account assignment, things like that, before I approve it. All right, this Again, using Power Automate, it's all over it. Power Automate is Microsoft's Swiss Army knife, as I mentioned. So if I wanted to review this, say, in Teams, and I went and looked at my activity feed, I have that new request here, right? So that request has been submitted and is integrated with Teams. So here's that same invoice for review and approval. I could look at the invoice, I could approve or reject it directly from Teams. Teams also gives me an app, as well as my phone has an app too. So I could do it from mobile, but if I go look at my approvals app here, I'll see that same invoice from the Teams app. So I could review it, approve it, put in my comments, edit it, etc. So it really doesn't matter which method you use. All of them are essentially executing the same approval task. So this looks good, and I will go ahead and submit it. And what's going to happen now is the Power Automate workflow is going to move forward, right? It's going to keep going through the various steps of the approval process. So here you can see I did receive an email confirming that it was approved with a link to it, but it's going to move it forward. But for the sake of simplicity, my workflow is pretty doggone simple. In other words, it only has a single step of approval. So what I'm going to do here is refresh this guy. And if all works well, we'll see our invoice actually disappeared from my view. Oops. Let's do a hard refresh. Let's go back there and go back into it, and then it should pick it up. All right, so now you can see my invoice is actually gone. It's not really quote unquote gone, but if I clear my status here, you can see I have one that has been updated to a submitted status. And what that means is it's actually been submitted to the ERP application. So if I go here, I could look at these various tabs associated to the invoice. And if I click on the Notes tab, I'll see the note that reviewer entered as it was going through the workflow, as well as an audit tab showing each step in the workflow process, who submitted it, when it went under review, what the approver did they approve or reject it, and then it got integrated or submitted to the ERP application. In addition, if I go to this last tab here, we'll actually see the transaction that got created in the ERP. So this one, as you can see, got integrated with GP. We support all kinds of ERP applications. If I look at one here that I have open, it's actually a Business Central integration, and it created this transaction directly in Business Central. So if I were to open up that transaction and bring it over, what we'll see is we call those web services that are being provided by Microsoft and created the invoice, right? So it pre-populated the invoice, the accounts, all of the dimensions in this case got assigned, and then we also provide a link that gives me the ability to drill back to that invoice and see the details and see the approval workflow all from that click of that button. So I could go in and look at my audits, or maybe look at the invoice itself, look at the notes, and do all that I want to do from that review page. Again, that review page is here, but you can see it's no longer editable, right? At this point, it's been integrated, and I can't change that invoice from this review page. So going back to our PowerPoint slide, that pretty much covers the process that we wanted to walk you through. So it covered those 3 steps. Again, what we're attempting to do here, right, and the whole intent of using this framework is if you look at what I covered today, there is the ERP integration, there's the invoice repository and having a central management for all these invoices, there's the workflow, there's the OCR. Really, Dynamic Point only has to do one part of this, right? And the rest of it comes from this framework. The rest of it comes from the tools that are being provided by your Office 365 subscription. And that's why we do these things, right? Because we could focus on that one area that holds all of this together and then use all of these tools that are obviously extremely flexible and configurable, especially in Power Automate or Flow. So by the looks on my watch here, I am right at time. So I wanted to thank everyone so much for joining today. Thank you for taking the half hour out of your day. We will follow up with all this information, including the presentation and links to the recorded demo. And thank you again, and have a great holiday season. Bye now.